if it's pure conscious. I didn't have a body, and I was sitting in that void. I didn't have ever, except for me, standing in nothing, an empty void. Best click, and I was in this other place, and I didn't remember why I was there. I didn't know that there was any other places to be. It was just so it wasn't just like a gradual fade. It was just an instant switch from being super angry to totally calm and quiet and alone. And later on in the story, I'll go into like how I know this was the point of me dying, but I eventually found out that my heart stopped, and I think that that moment where everything went quiet could have been me going unconscious, and then when the experience deepened is when my heart stopped. I can't, there's no way to tell for sure, but this place that I woke up in, it was just absolute nothingness. I didn't have a body, but I could see. There was no temperature, no color. I didn't have any other senses that I was aware of other than just being conscious. Like there was nothing to see, or there was nothing to hear. There was nothing to feel. It was just nothing, literally nothing forever, except for me, standing in nothing, an empty void. Best way that I can explain it is there's this, I always use this analogy. There's this part in the movie The Matrix where Neo is talking to Morpheus and they're in a white room and it's just them. And I think Morpheus is sitting at a desk or something, but in the room, you can't tell the depth of the room. It's like, it's almost just like a place in someone's mind where there's no walls, there's no floor, there's no ceiling. It's just foreverness. And in the movie, it's white, but in my experience I had, it was black. It was blacker than black, like emptiness, what emptiness would look like. And so I was aware that I was in this emptiness. So it was almost as if I was just pure conscious. I didn't have a body and I was sitting in that void. I didn't have any memories either. So I don't know why I was there. I didn't know if I was a man or a woman or a human. I didn't know that gender existed. I didn't even know what a human was at this point. I was just aware. Almost like what I would picture like a baby's conscious experience might be in the womb of their mom. It was literally, I had no idea at all. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel like I was in danger. I was just fresh. It was almost like a brand new conscious experience. But interestingly, it felt comfortable. Like it felt like I was home. And there was a deep interest that I had. I kind of felt like I'm going to end up using a lot of analogies. These kinds of experiences are very hard to put into words, but it's kind of like a mad scientist staring at a whole bunch of brand new chemicals that he's never used before. It's like that type of interest. I had that intrigue. And I felt like that void was familiar, like something that I'd known before, but I had no concept of what before might have even been. Like I had no memory of this life. I had no memory of this life or maybe next lives. I had nothing to work with other than just the void I was in and my interest in what I was doing there. And so I sat with myself in this void like that for what felt like hundreds of years. And eventually I started to kind of observe my own thoughts in a way. Like I felt the observer effect. Like I noticed that I was me and I noticed that I had thoughts. And so I would start to focus deeper on my thoughts, observing what I was thinking about. Like, wow, what is this? Why does this feel so familiar? And I'm observing myself thinking about this stuff. And the more that I focused on my thoughts, these lights started to flicker. If I focused on a thought very deeply, it would flicker, and in the void would all shine. There would be like colors flashing, kind of like when lightning hits the sky and the whole night sky lights up. The whole void was lighting up with these flashes of color. It was like bursts of lightning, lighting everything up. And so the deeper that I thought, the more colors would flash. And then when I would think about my thoughts and those colors flashing, they would get a little bit crazier. And so I made the connection that like I'm controlling this area that I'm in with my thoughts. And I tried to play around with that, and I ended up doing some wild stuff. But the first like object that I was able to see in this experience was a tree. And I don't remember why it was a tree. I just remember feeling, I think it was the color green. I seen these flashes flashing, and the color green is something I've always been attached to. It's been my favorite color my whole life. And like back when I was experimenting with a lot of substances, the color green was always kind of like my safe space. So if I was like going off into la la land, I'd hang on to something green and it would bring me back to reality. So I have like this connection to the color green, but this color green started flashing and eventually turned into a tree. I don't remember what kind of tree it was, but this tree was actually in front of me. I could see it now. Now it wasn't just a void. It was me and conscious in this void with this tree. And I focused deeply on it. It was the only thing to attach my focus to. And this tree, what was interesting is I could kind of like, there's no gravity in this experience. I could fly around it. I could go through it. I could go above it or below it in all directions. I could even sit still and kind of move the tree away from me. And it's kind of hard to tell the difference in this area because it's nothingness, but I could tell the difference. Like I had spatial awareness that I was moving away from the tree or that the tree was moving away from me. And so I started to become more aware of these dimensions that I was in, so to speak. I could push this tree around, and I could push myself around. And so now I knew that my thoughts could kind of form these three-dimensional objects, and that I could move in this space, that I had places to go to. And I found out that I could go into the tree. And so I played around with that for a little while too. I would go into the tree, and I could kind of like satiate inside of the tree itself and become the tree and feel what it feels like to be the tree in the void instead of just me in the void. And so I became the tree for a while. And I noticed that like my thoughts, this just comes to me right now, and I wish I would have done it then, but what would it have been like if I created things while being the tree instead of creating while being me? But that's for another time. So I had this realization that my thoughts could create physicality in this space. And that realization lasted what felt like another couple hundred years. Everything was moving weird compared to how we experience time in this life, but I kept creating stuff. I kept building planets that were like slightly similar to Earth, slightly different. Some had no people; they were just planets. Some had very weak caveman level type humans. One interesting thing is in all these planets that I made, the ones that had civilizations had no animals in them, and so there was some weird implication of a connection between me and the planet and nature and humans, but animals were not included. There was no birds. There was no like dogs or cats or horses or nothing like that. It was civilizations built on just nature and humans. But I kept building these planets and building these humans, and in that moment, I didn't realize it because I had no memory of my previous. So I'm just gonna call it my previous life, which is this life right now. And but after analyzing it a while after the experience, I noticed that the things that I was creating in this experience, they kind of echoed things that I'm deeply interested in, things that I would then go later on in my adult life to study deeply in college, and things like ancient cultures and different ways of society and sociology and different ways of living, and different types of geography and how that has different implications on the societies there. So all of these things that I would grow to then learn in adult life, I was creating worlds that kind of mirrored that, even though I wasn't aware of these things in that space. So these places kind of resembled like ancient Babylon, ancient Samaria, Egypt, Native America, all the way to futures like I don't know, a future space of the UK or Dubai, or like if it was in year 2200. Have you ever seen the movie The Fifth Element with Nicolas Cage? So it'd be like that. The future spaces were like that, with big old buildings, floating cars, space scenes, so to speak. And so all of these planets I made were a wide variety of things. Just humans, just civilizations. But I was watching them and playing them out like I was a master controller of this. It was almost like a video game, like a giant Sims game. And I was creating all of it and not necessarily controlling every little aspect, but I could make the thing, kind of set it where it's at and just watch it and observe it. And it would live out, like in the Sims game, when you don't touch any controls, the player on the game kind of just does their own thing and they continue going without your control. That's what was happening. I wasn't necessarily making my creation do stuff, but I would create it and observe it while it was choosing to do its own stuff. And then I watched all my creations kind of play. And I also realized that I could pause time for them, rewind time for them, so I could see my planets kind of crumble and then be rebuilt and do it all over again. I could rewind civilizations and fast forward civilizations to see where they end up and if they survive. And so I'm kind of just zooming around this space, this void with all of my planets and all of my civilizations that I made, hopping from planet to planet, zooming around and observing the creation. And after that lasted for another couple hundred years, it seems like forever when you're in it, I remembered that I experienced being a tree at the very beginning of my experience. And so I wanted to test that out with the people that I made. I should have experienced everything. I should have seen what it was like to be a planet, but, oh well. But so I started experiencing people. I started to go into people. And while I was them, I didn't control them, but I was seeing their experience through their eyes. And this is when I first had senses. Like I could feel, I could taste, I could hear things. It was all the same senses that we have in this life. It was just like this life, but it was almost like I possessed these people and they weren't aware that I was inside of them. They weren't aware that I was experiencing their life, observing their life through their eyes. And I had this weird feeling that these people were me. Like they weren't separate from me. They were my creation. And so it wasn't kind of like I wasn't crossing any lines to go experience and go inside these people's consciousness. It felt like I was able to do that because they were me. They were kind of like an emanation of my thoughts. And so, it was almost like my property, so to speak. And so I was experiencing person to person. And then I had like this really extreme realization that hit me.
Diabetes,
coronary disease,
autoimmune diseases,
obesity, cancer,
pretty much all chronic diseases of the.
And I wanted to I knew that I could experience the plants, the plant life, and I wanted to experience these people, so I did that. And then I realized, what would it be like to experience a full life of one of these people? Because my time and their time is much different. These people I created aren't even aware of me. It's almost like I'm a ghost. And so what would it be like? And at this moment, all I knew was my experience in this void. I didn't know what it was like to be a human outside of me going and experiencing them for small parts of time. But I wanted a full human experience. And so I realized that I could go into one of these people that I created permanently, and I would become or try to become ignorant of my experience in this void. I would try my best to forget that I created this person that I'm now experiencing, to get the full bodily experience of that human's life from birth to death. And I had assumed that once that person was born, I'd experience their life to when they died. I'd return back to this void to where I was at. But I would have to forget making all of it. It would just be a regular life, almost like reincarnation into that person, so to speak. And so I started to look around for someone that interested me enough to experience their entire life. And I hopped around. I was observing these different people in these different circumstances, and I ended up choosing this man. He kind of looked like a mix of like Germanic, Scandinavian, and Egyptian. He was like a dark-skinned white guy, maybe Persian, actually, now that I think about it. But he had crazy jewelry on and gems, and they were all gold. He seemed like some type of royal guy, had some royal position or some type of nobility, and he was a blend of all of these different cultures that I find interesting, and which is, again, it reflects my interests that I then grew to learn as an adult, which is weird, about history and religion and ancient worlds. And so he was kind of like the culmination of all my interests that I didn't have yet in the real world. I only had those interests about 10 years later, which maybe I had those interests because of this experience, but I don't know. But right when I chose to go in and experience this person permanently, like to become him and to become ignorant that I created him, there was no swoosh, there was no tunnel. It was just a click. Just as fast as this whole experience began, it ended. And I opened my eyes and I was in a lot of pain. I was back into my body. Everything was back to normal. My memories didn't come back immediately, but I was aware in my own body again. EMTs were above me and they had a portable defibrillator strapped to me. And the best way to, even though I had all that traumatic stuff going on when I woke up, it felt nostalgic. Just like me going into that void felt like I was back home, me returning to my body felt like I was back home too. But it felt like I was returning to a body that was 5,000 years old. Very, very weird experience. And I remember reaching for my face and thinking that it was weird that I didn't have any facial hair because I felt like an old man. And it was awkward to come back to my body. I'll say that. At the very least, it was just awkward. I remember thinking that I should be an old man right now. Like, I've lived for so long. Why am I in a young man's body and why am I all tore up? And I had to have, like, slowly but surely, I had to have my friends kind of remind me of why I was laying on the ground and why I had EMTs trying to save my life. And it was all too much to kind of take in at that moment. But slowly but surely, I started to, like, remember my body and remember my name and remember who I was and why my leg was tore up and remember that I, just got hit by a car and that I almost died. And it was just very interesting. I had so much going on when I came back to my body. My leg was so swollen. I could barely move it a couple inches off the ground. They had me propped up. They held my back up. Everyone was just standing around me. And so it's hard to put it into words, but it was like I was the center of attention and everybody was looking at me like I was some type of monster or something. But they were all just surprised that I survived, I think. But that whole instance in that void felt like thousands of years. But in the real world, in this life, it only lasted, I think, about a half a minute is what I was told. I was told that my heart did stop. That's why they had to strap me to a defibrillator. And it was only, I think they said like 20 something seconds. So about a half a minute that I was on the verge of, permanently dying. And I mean, my heart stopping could have been from a wide variety of things. I had a concussion from getting hit by the car. I had a lot of body trauma at the time. The dude choking me out definitely could have helped. I was intoxicated at the time. It was probably a combination of all of it. And it took me a while to process it all. But, sitting with my body, or coming back to my body and sitting with my life that I was in, it was almost like a slap to the face because whereas before I didn't realize the chaos that my life was, coming from a totally different experience back to the chaos of my life, especially in that traumatic circumstance, it was an extreme revelation of like, dang, I'm really living like this. Like, look at all the crazy stuff that I'm, involved in. I'm the center of this crazy stuff right here. All of this chaos is because of my choices. And so this time when I was like trying to kind of like reconnect with my identity in this world, I reconnected to my identity in this world with the realization that probably ended up saving my life because I was now aware of my life. Whereas before I didn't have one care in the world if I lived or died, now I cared. Like now I knew that my choices could easily lead to me losing my life. So it's not that I was like afraid of death, but I was just much more aware of my mortality, so to speak, and aware of the chaos that was going on in my life. But the party shut down when the ambulance got called, obviously, and I stayed at that friend's house for a few days. Luckily, my friend's mom was a nurse, and she knew the EMTs that were at the party, and so like some strings were pulled to where I didn't have to go stay in the hospital or anything, and that was nice. So I stayed at my friend's house for a while. I had to hobble around on crutches for about a year until I got the movement back in my knee. I ended up tearing when I got hit by the car. I tore my ACL and my MCL. I did have a concussion, and I can't remember what they said it was what they call it specifically when your heart stops from trauma. But that's what happened. I mean, that was my experience. That's why I died. Yeah, it was all pretty crazy.
Celebrate every moment. The milestones, those big firsts, and those most human moments. Every new love, fluff, and face. Celebrate being human with Etsy.